Hi everybody, welcome to the second tutorial in this series. Today I would like to talk to you about the concept of dissociation, which is a very important concept in Argentine Tango. It's something that gives this particular dance the look, the aesthetic that it has. And to understand dissociation, I'm going to use a few exercises and a few images so that you can take that and explore dissociation for yourself. So ultimately, we can imitate the look, we can look at the exterior form of tango, we can look at the lines and we can try to copy that, and that's one level of learning. But to go beyond that, I'd like to introduce some exercises that would allow you to explore within yourself what is dissociation, how to tell whether you're doing it, what is safe and not safe for your body to do. And in that way, hopefully you develop your own awareness of your body and how to use dissociation to create some of those awesome forms that exist in Argentine Tango. So to start, I'd like to use a chair, and if you'd like to join me, grab a chair and I'll walk you through a few of the starting exercises. So what we're going to do is we're going to start sitting at the edge of the chair. And what I'd like for you to become aware of is just the activity in your legs to start. So if you haven't seen the first tutorial, there's a nice little segment on how to begin to feel the growing of the axis from the feet. So I won't go into that too much now. You can watch the other one on your own time. But to start, I want you to feel that you're going to bring attention into the legs as if you were going to push yourself back in the chair. So here my legs are just relaxed, and then I begin to just kind of push into the ground, and if I push a lot, I'll do something like this, okay? But I'm not actually going to do that. I'm just going to feel that impulse. And as I do that, you'll notice that you start pushing kind of into your pelvis. So this is just a nice awareness exercise. So the difference between moving the pelvis by itself, so here I'm moving the pelvis, versus moving, pushing into the ground, and movement of the pelvis happening because I'm pushing into the ground. So you see the difference. Here I'm just moving the pelvis, legs are not active, versus I'm pushing into the ground and the pelvis responds. So that's the action, the latter action that I want you to kind of tune into. So here, I'm going to go ahead and push into the ground. I'm going to feel that I'm sending the energy up. And then coming back to that image of an upside down drum. So the pelvic floor, the muscles that line your pelvis is kind of like the top of the drum. And then we have these strings all along the core, the spine, that we can manipulate. We can pull them tighter or loosen them in order to keep our axis. So here, I want you to imagine that. So a lot of times teachers talk about engagement of the pelvic floor, and that tends to be kind of confusing. I will cover that in a separate tutorial, but for today, I just want you to have that visual that you have these strings that you can tighten so you can engage your core, and your pelvic floor will automatically engage. It's really, really hard to engage the core, especially in the front, and not feel your pelvic floor engaged. So the way it looks from externally, if I don't engage anything here and relax my pelvic floor, my posture will be something like this. So here you see kind of my belly puffs out. I have a bit more lordotic curve in my lower back. My pelvis rolls forward. If I sit back in the chair a little bit more, it will roll back. So this is the posture. This, I'm not using anything. My legs are relaxed, right? So then I begin to, so let's start from here. I begin to push into the ground, and then I think about tightening slightly, tuning the drum, just to feel that I'm lifted, and then I feel more buoyant, right? We're going to start by coming back to this image of the drum. So I'm going to begin to tighten the strings in the front and lengthen my strings in the back without changing the pelvis. So the other image I used in the first tutorial is this cylinder that's right in front. So imagining that I'm wrapping my spine like a chain around a gear, coming forward, and then as if I'm going to tighten the strings in the back, I'm going to come back up and tighten the strings in the back, lengthen the strings in the front, and reach my sternum up. Now as I do this, I want you to pay attention to a very important piece, that I'm not changing the position of my pelvis. I am just moving my ribs, my sternum, my upper body. My shoulders are relaxed, they're just responding to what's happening. They're not actively doing anything. So the difference is that we don't want this. You see? So the difference here, I'm actually shifting my pelvis and I'm pushing my ribs front to back. Okay? Especially in this position, this is very common that when we think about lifting, when we think about posture, a lot of people think it's this. So what happens when I do this is I'm automatically opening up my ribs, collapsing my spine. And so in order to sustain this, really what your body has to do is create tension in other areas. And really this is about the limitation of your bones. You're kind of getting to the part where it's like, okay, your skeleton will not let you go any further. We don't necessarily want that. We want more the feeling that at any moment we can manipulate, pull back, pull forward, push forward. We can manipulate, we're always ready to jump. This idea of like, there's always readiness no matter where we go. So watch. So instead of opening my floating ribs forward and changing the position of my pelvis, or doing that without changing the position of my pelvis, here I keep my pelvis, but I just open forward. Instead I'm going to think up. And my floating ribs will open as a result slightly, but there's a lot of tone between. So at any moment, I can pull back. Similar here, as I go down, I'm not going to allow my pelvis to roll back. So that here, it'd be very hard for me to sit up without shifting my pelvis. I would have to kind of do something to get myself up. Because if I sit up, then I'm actually going to get heavy this way. So mechanically, that doesn't make sense. So I would have to shift my pelvis, right? So instead of shifting the pelvis, I ground down into the legs, I keep everything stable, and I just roll forward, and then I roll back. So this is a form of dissociation here. I'm keeping my lower body steady while my upper body dissociates, right? And the way I like to think of the process of dissociation is finding limits to your movement. And the limits are muscular and connective tissue. So we're not thinking about limits in the bone or the joints, like I'm going to take my joint as far as possible. No. We're thinking about creating an action where I find opposing points. So I have a point at the end of my arm and I have a point here, and I'm stretching those 2 points apart, and then eventually I feel a limit, and then that tension will bring my arm back. So here I'm creating that through my spine. So I'm going to create an opposition in the front. So I'm creating an opposition. I'm feeling these rubber bands stretching. And then when I need to, they will pull back in, realigning. And the same thing is going to happen when I go forward. So I roll forward, and I want to feel the opposition from the base to my head, so that at any point, they will pull me back up. Okay? It's a little bit more subtle, feeling it in the back, but use imagery to help you to feel it more. So then, let's take this into the more common dissociation that we see in Tango, which is the twist side to side. So when you're doing any kind of pivoting, ochos, enrosques for leaders, you have to have dissociation that allows you to spiral, that gives this illusion that your body is spiraling, and there's all these different parts to it. So I want to first establish my base. So I'm going to push into the ground. I feel the strings of my core tightens. They're ready. I'm ready for movement. Here's relaxed. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin to turn. I'm going to turn to one side, and I'm only going to turn as much as my muscles are able to turn me. It's not very much. So here I'm really stretching, and I feel this stretch across my front. I feel these oblique muscles really working to twist me. And then it's so tight that it just kind of snaps back in for me to release. So I'm going to show you from the front. So going to the other side. So first I find my base. Then I have the awareness that here from the front to the back I have the support of these strings. Then I begin to turn. And as I turn, I'm looking for opposition. I'm looking for my limit. My limit in this case is going to be a point from here to here. So here, there's no dissociation. As I begin to turn, it's like I'm stretching across and I'm looking for where is my limit. This is what for followers is very important to tap into, because this is what leaders want to feel. They want to feel where is your end point, so that they know how to lead that boleo, they know how to lead those ochos. And then as I'm stretching, as I release, the tone just kind of brings me back, right? So it's like I'm snapping back to the center. Now, why is it so important? Why do I keep mentioning this foundation? Pressing into the ground, feeling all of this. The reason is that if you don't have those, it's very hard to find your limits. So if I don't have the foundation of my legs and I begin to turn, something like this might happen. And as you can see, I can use my arms and I can twist even more. Even if I don't exaggerate it so much, if I just don't use my legs, notice how far I can go. On the one hand, to our brain, it's like, oh, that's what we want. We want to go further. That means we're better, we're more flexible. But really, that becomes more confusing when you're trying to do really fast turns, really fast pivots, because your body will kind of lag behind. So if I make my lower body completely inactive, and if I turn, what will happen is these muscles here going across are going to pull my hip with it, and I'm going to continue turning. So now I'm actually not in as much of a twist. I've just changed my limit because I've collapsed my base. So for this particular exercise, I would love for you to use a mirror and really pay attention that as you turn, pretend that you're pushing this way, right? You're pulling across, and at the same time, you're pushing this back. So there's two forces. So feel these two forces. So I'm gonna turn to the left. As I turn to the left, I'm actually pushing my right hip back. Shoulders are relaxed, so we also don't want to do this. And very key, very common for followers or anybody who has a lot of flexibility, we're not going to do this. So here I'm lifting my ribs because I want a little extra, and so this gives me a feeling that I can turn a little bit more. That's not necessary. We don't need that. We don't want to collapse in any direction. We want to keep our axis. So be very cautious that as you turn, you're turning only in this way without tilting in any way, and you're pressing that opposite hip, pressing it back. So there's two actions going on. So this is what would be called dissociation. So I'm dissociating the lower body from the upper body. So to put it all together, you can practice pushing into the ground, feeling your pelvic floor and core lifting you up, relax the shoulders, and just isolating, dissociating the upper body from the lower body. Going up, coming down, coming back up, going to the right, coming back to center, and going to the left.